Well, my friends, I've gone and done it again. I picked up another project. My last project is sitting right here. 2011 Saab 94X Aero. Haven't really done much to it. I have to order some parts for it. Did a little digging around on it. I think I know what's wrong with it. It does run and drive-ish. Battery's dead. It's very cold. It's midwinter in Ohio currently. But I see the potential in things. I'm always scrolling Face Space Marketplace, and I couldn't pass up a good deal when I found it. So fortunately, my wife is super awesome. She doesn't mind, or at least she doesn't admit that she minds, the fact that I have 5 vehicles and 2 motorcycles. I think maybe next year I'm gonna trim that fleet down a little bit, but we shall see. So my last project before this one, I actually 5-speed swap my K1500 GMT platform pickup truck, OBS, old body style Chevy, and I will have a video out on that hopefully shortly. But in the time being, I was scrolling Face Space, I found this. I have a strong connection to this vehicle, not this one in particular, but this platform. And like I said, I see the potential in things, and I couldn't pass up a good deal. So let me flip this camera around and show you at some point what my next project's gonna be. Almost. So this is my latest project I picked up, 1995 Chevy S10 Blazer. Here's a size comparison from my 2011 Saab 94X, that rare unicorn, in comparison to this old Blazer. Definitely a lot wider, longer, and height-wise they're pretty close. But the 95 Blazer here, it's the first year for this new generation, maybe, that they call it. I don't know. 94 and older was a boxier body style. 95 is considered kind of a weird transition year, something with the engine. And then in 96 they went to maybe TBI, correct me if I'm wrong. I know a lot of people ignore these 95s, but I literally had a 1995 Chevy S10 Blazer, very similar to this, kind of baby blue. This is kind of more teal, but it does look blue in the camera, but in person it's a bit more green. But I had one of these in high school for a number of years. It's kind of the vehicle that really got me into working on things. I did a lot of DIY stuff to it, hacked a bunch of stuff, but that's what happens when you're in high school, don't have a lot of money. You have, I guess, more ambition than skills. So I ended up selling it after many, many, many miles on the thing. I've had a couple S10s in between, a K5 Blazer, but for whatever reason, I'll always have an attachment to these little S10 Blazers and S10s. So I couldn't pass up finding this one on Marketplace for cheap. Originally purchased supposedly in Georgia. Has 79,000 miles on it, and it is not completely rusted out like you oftentimes see. But definitely be cautious if you see one of these two-tone, because oftentimes people have rust issues and they will bedline, do whatever they can to hide rust in these areas. So these old man running boards, they're aluminum. Nothing against them. I have them on my K1500, my old 98 Chevy. I do love them. They're staying on it. But this one, they're going to go. But I will say, I'm pretty sure they're the reason why these rockers are in excellent shape. Body-wise, outside of that, not too bad. A couple dings, dents along the way. Faded trim, which I may just remove it. I may paint it. I don't know quite yet. So while it was purchased in Georgia, supposedly from June Walker in Blue Ridge, Georgia, it spent a lot of its life in Ohio. So this trailer hitch is very, very bad. Yeah, definitely don't want to be hooking anything to that. Underneath though, it's not too bad. Definitely needs tires. Has a little oopsie on the back there. On this side, it's not immediately noticeable, but it does have a little rust, and that is in this wheel arch area. Opening up the door, just this small little section right here. And it almost looks like this bolt, maybe it was like too long or something, and it pierced here, or I don't know, it chipped the paint and water got in there. But literally it's still solid, and that's the only area on the body that has any form of rust. Interior, while it's not my favorite, tan interior will never ever be my favorite color in interior unless it's like a dark peanut butter color. But this one, being lower miles, it's actually in really nice shape. You know, typical kind of dirty carpets. Seats are actually incredibly clean, at least in the back. Little schmutz here and there, but not bad. That bottle of antifreeze is kind of a hint of why I got this thing so cheap. Of course, some different stains and such. I'll show you the front. This is the LS, so it's a lower trim model. Does have power windows, power locks. But outside of that, it's pretty standard. I guess with the exception of the push button 4-wheel drive, which I'll get to in a little bit. But here's the passenger seat. Dash is in really nice shape. These defroster vents, notorious for cracking. Kind of like the first thing the sun hits and they crack and fall down in there. Can be a pain to get out, but pretty easy to replace. Front carpets are definitely a lot dirtier, which is par for the course. Things spilling by these cup holders. It's kind of funny that this glove box comes down. You can have some cup holders there, and it's like how the vent separates. Kind of cool. So 79,000 miles. My original Blazer I had a tack. It was also the LT, which had leather seats and everything. I like the cloth compared to the leather, because I'm sure by now, 30 years later, that leather, any of those are now crumbled apart. These cloth seats hold up really well, but I do wish it was kind of like that black and gray interior. But like I said, my other one had a tachometer. I need to figure out if I can swap a tack in here, swap out this gauge cluster, maybe transfer over the odometer. I'll have to do a little more research on that, but I would love to put a tack in here. Everything for the most part seems to work, except the air conditioning. Heat blows pretty darn toasty. Kind of interesting dome light there. Definitely looks pretty old. My other one had kind of a interesting like console. I vaguely remember something with like MPGs and maybe the temperature up here. I don't know if that's something I could swap in. If not, it's really no big deal. But overall, this thing is in really nice shape for the age. And another thing to sort of confirm maybe or lean towards this actually being purchased in Georgia. Here's the cards, supposedly, from when this truck was purchased new. So it does have the owner's manual. I'll have to look more. So the base coat, clear coat, that'll be the paint code. I'll need to look it up to see what exactly the paint is, and also all these different RPO codes. I'm sure there's really nothing as far as options for this vehicle, but it would be cool just to kind of do a basic research on it. Now, I need to put the battery back in it. I'll start it up here in a second. It does have some form of a drain because it has this aftermarket system to it. I think it's an alarm and maybe a remote start. Googled the numbers on this thing, and I have some batteries ordered, but up top here is kind of the receiver. Battery, or a light stays on that, and it just drains the battery. I'm curious if this thing even works. So I just ordered some batteries off of Amazon that'll come in 2 days. But as far as the engine bay goes, actually before that, look at this. These tilt levers for these seats are notorious to break, and it's actually in nice shape. I think there's supposed to be trim here and that's gone, but that's no big deal. Anyways, back to the engine bay. Here's what it looks like for 1995. They do kind of have a unique intake to them for these Vortex. I think in 96 they switched to maybe like TBI, throttle body injected, correct me if I'm wrong. So it's like a OBD 1.5, something with the electronics, or basically OBD1, but then the port that you plug your check engine scanner into is an OBD2. I need to do more research on it, but again, I had a 95 for many years and it wasn't an issue getting codes read or anything like that. Front end wise, it did have a little boo-boo up here. Previous owner smacked something hard enough at least to break the tow hook, push the valance in slightly, and then this bumper, which is metal and pretty stout, back about an inch or so, but that is no big deal. It kind of blends in pretty good. And then there's some weird runs on it, but I think what that is from is the previous owner sprayed on underneath and some different common areas to rust out with some oily undercoating stuff. So I don't mind that because they were doing that to protect things. So some of it kind of ran on the bumper. That's no big deal. Can pressure wash that out. A little bit of rust. Again, this thing is 30 years old almost at this point. A little bit of rust down here, some rust in the battery tray, but overall, engine bay isn't too terrible. My last one, this heater box thing was crumbling also. I think just with age, this stuff gets so brittle. So as long as that still works, I don't mind it being a little cosmetically ugly. And it does run really well, leaks coolant. Previous owner mentioned they took it to a shop, and supposedly one of the two freeze plugs on the passenger side are ruptured. So it leaks when it sits, it leaks a little bit when it runs. The radiator fluid doesn't look great, but it doesn't look like it has a blown head gasket. It's just a bit rusty, and there is coolant in there, but for whatever reason it looks a little more water than coolant. But I definitely know that's not the case, because the current temperature right now, that would be frozen if it were water. The overflow reservoir is basically bone dry. Some remnants of the orange Dex Cool coolant in there. Oil looks good, almost like it was recently changed. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, but at least for the time being, it's not milky. It doesn't smoke when it runs, and at least when the battery is plugged in, this thing fired right up. It's pretty sanitary and definitely complete. Now, you can find these things all over FaceSpace in various conditions. This one, for the price of $1,600 and relatively local to me, was a bargain and a half. My intentions for this thing are basically what I wanted to do to my other Blazer I had, but I didn't have the means to do it. So I'm gonna fix the coolant. Hopefully it's just a simple freeze plug. Pull off these running boards. I may actually do that today. And then what I want to do from there is get rid of the four-wheel drive, the auto push button, or the electric push button four-wheel drive system. It does work. There's something like shoved into here, because I actually had to put it in four-wheel drive just to get it on the trailer because it was kind of icy. So I know for a fact the four-wheel drive works, but I want to switch it to the floor shift, because it just, these things are notorious for various issues. It's like a electric vacuum to a mechanical cable system. It's very bizarre. I think for the time period it was kind of advanced. I would love to 5-speed swap this. I did just 5-speed swap my K1500. While it was labor intensive, it is very doable, and that's something that I always wanted to do with my other Blazer. So manual shift, manual transfer case, and then my favorite part that I want to do to this thing is not only lift it. Now, I'm not going to be mud bogging this thing, but I do want to lift it to at least have 33s or 35s on it, hack off the independent front suspension, possibly get the Skies off-road solid axle kit, get some leaf springs, maybe some Wagoneer axles or something else, and get this thing up off the ground. Now, it doesn't necessarily make sense to have this being a 5-speed manual, having it lifted on solid axles, but when it comes down to it, I'm not gonna be rock crawling this thing. I want it to be more of a kind of fun cruiser around town. Then when we get some snow, just kind of hoon around in some snow, and then of course off-road at time to time. So I think it'll be a perfect combo. 5-speed manual for the fun factor, manual floor shift, four-wheel drive system or transfer case, get rid of some of the convoluted four-wheel drive electric shift stuff with this particular vehicle, and then of course a solid axle to get this thing up off the ground, do away with all this factory old suspension in the front that is probably blown out, and then probably do some other things, maybe some steel bumpers. I'd love to get a tire carrier on the back. Thought about swapping in a ZR2 factory. Obviously you got to drill some holes in the quarter panel and mount the plate right there. However, I've read you definitely need to reinforce it, and then also if you're going with 35s, that's a lot of weight hanging out on the back, so I'm probably better off going with an aftermarket steel bumper that has the tire carrier mounted directly to it. But overall, this is the project, at least at some point. I don't know if I'm going to get to this before the Saab or the Saab before this, but either way, I'm slowly going to have content out on both of these along with my K1500. But let's fire this thing up. Never really been a fan of these side post batteries, but here we are. I think majority of my vehicles have side posts. One really relatively annoying thing is the fact that this thing has 4 keys and they're not all just duplicates. Basically, 1 key is for the door, 1 is for the ignition, 1 is for the rear hatch lock cylinder, and I think the door key, or at least one of them, is duplicated. So eventually I'd like to get to the point where I just have 1 key for all the different locks and the ignition on this thing, but I'll worry about that at a later time. For the time being, let's figure out which one of these 4 keys start this thing. This thing pretty much fires right up. Sounds really good. The only noise I'm hearing sounds like it might be from one of the pulleys for the accessories. Maybe a tensioner pulley, idler pulley, probably the serpentine belt. All that's long overdue for replacement. But nothing coming from the engine as far as knocks, ticks, nothing like that. Now, it probably looks terrible on camera. It is smoking currently. Well, that's because it is 20-some degrees right now, so this thing needs to warm up. Now, it's a good sign that the exhaust, for the most part, seems like it's all coming from the rear. So hopefully that exhaust is completely factory and fully intact. I don't hear anything as far as exhaust leaks goes. And I certainly haven't crawled underneath this thing to really fully examine it to know what the exhaust looks like. I do know it's not super rusty. I crawled underneath it when I purchased it and had typical rust belt state surface rust on things, but nothing rusted completely out. Sounds pretty good. It's just really weird not having a tachometer. The gauges seem to work. The temp, when I was test driving this thing, I did see the temp did move, so I know that for a fact works. And the fuel gauge on these, notorious for floating around. This one is no different. And then the heat, I think I have all speeds. I have tested the radio. I think this passenger side door speaker is the only one that's blown, and that's definitely no big deal. But everything else seems factory, seems complete. Let's check out the back hatch real quick. I believe this rear wiper does not work, but I love the utilitarian style of this thing. Has the glass hatch that opens up. You could have wood sticking out or something long, or if you wanted the tailgate down, you flip down the handle and you can sit on the tailgate, fold the seats down, and have plenty of cargo room. And it still has the privacy shade. Oh, that goes across like that. And then I assume this is that missing and broken seat trim for the driver's side. Not too worried about that. Let's see if this retracts. Of course it doesn't. Probably should have never messed with that. Well, that's like that for the time being. But here it is. So that's the overview of my latest project, my 1995 Chevy S10 Blazer. Be sure to like the video if you like this kind of thing and subscribe for more Blazer content, some older Chevy stuff, or even some Saab stuff, or how to, maybe some dog things. And drop a comment down below if you have any information on the S10 Blazers or S10s as far as, say, 5-speed swaps, the manual transfer case swaps, maybe even solid axle swaps, anything that may help me in the future with this project. I appreciate you making it this far in the video, and and I'll catch you friends next time. Thanks for watching.